Right, we've got 34 participants here. Let's give it a minute and we will get started. Participants who are here, please would you introduce yourselves in the chat? You can put your name, institution, organization, and location in for everyone here to just get to know you a little bit. Generally, if you just scroll over your image or pass your mouse over the image, you can see the mute button on that. Or on the bottom left is a microphone. And we ask everybody who's not participating in the webinar just yet, when we get to the Q&A, you can certainly unmute yourselves. But for now, if you could keep your Zoom muted, that would be lovely. Thank you for putting all your information in the chat. It's lovely to see so many people here. All right, we are now almost 50 people. So let's get this started. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the very first of a three-part webinar series that's brought to you by the CGIAR FCM Initiative, International Water Management Institute, IWMI, and the Anticipation Hub's Anticipatory Action and Conflict Working Group. I'm Chavi Sachdev. I'm your moderator today. And as I join you from Mumbai, India, I'm really happy to extend a warm welcome to all of you joining us today from all around the world. We're thrilled to have such a diverse and engaged audience here with us, and we really appreciate your taking the time to be part of this really, really important discussion. I also want to extend a special welcome to our partner, the Anticipation Hub. Today's webinar, as you know, is centered on navigating anticipatory actions in fragile and conflict-afflicted settings to improve food, land, and water systems. This topic is not only timely, but critical. It's very important as we look to the future of humanitarian and development efforts. When we talk about crises, especially in the context of climate change, the worst affected regions are often those that are fragile and conflict affected. Here, the challenges are immense and multifaceted because these regions are often characterized by instability, limited access to essential resources, and heightened vulnerability. In such environments, the traditional reactive approaches to crisis management often fall short. And this is where anticipatory action comes into play. By anticipatory actions, we mean proactive measures that are taken to reduce the impacts of potential crises before they fully unfold. And by enhancing early warning systems, facilitating data-driven decision-making, and strengthening adaptive capacity, anticipatory actions can significantly mitigate risks and also build resilience. And this proactive approach is especially crucial in fragile settings where the margin error is zero, it's minimal, and the stakes are incredibly high. So as we begin today's discussion, it's essential to recognize that as the world continues to witness unprecedented challenges from global pandemics to the climate crisis, these foster heightened fragility, conflict, and migration, what we're calling FCM. And increased fragility, conflict, and migration constitute significant threats to global development, peace, stability of food, land, and water systems. And for that, we need stable and resilient food systems to ensure food security. We need effective management of land to support sustainable agriculture and reduce conflict over resources. And we need reliable and sustainable water systems for drinking, sanitation, agriculture, all of which lead to overall stability and development of these regions. So today in this webinar, we're going to explore these themes in depth, and we'll hear from our experts who have been at the forefront of implementing anticipatory action in some of the world's most challenging environments. We're confident their insights and experiences will shed light on how we can collectively work towards more resilient and sustainable systems in fragile and conflict-afflicted settings. With that said, I'm going to quickly outline our agenda for today. We're starting with the roundtable discussion, where I will ask each of our 4 panelists questions based on their expertise and their region. After that, we'll open the floor for an interactive Q&A session in which you, the participants, can engage directly with the 4 of them. And before that, we have a little housekeeping to take care of. I'm just going to go over a few rules of engagement. Won't take up too much time. You can use the chat where you're introducing yourselves to also submit questions anytime during the webinar. You think of things, if they're fresh, just type them in. We'll address as many of the questions as we can after the roundtable in our designated Q&A session. During the roundtable, please keep your microphones muted. We request that to avoid background noise and so that everyone can hear the speakers clearly. And we always want to have a respectful, constructive discussion. So we appreciate your cooperation in maintaining a positive and engaging atmosphere. Thank you again for joining us. Now let's get started. Before I introduce our panel, I would like to invite Dr. Sandra Ruckstuhl, a senior researcher at IWMI and the co-lead of the CGIAR Initiative on Fragility, Conflict and Migration, to share a few remarks with us and kick off the webinar. Sandy, please.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well? Yes, okay, good. So good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everybody. So for those of you who do not know the CGIAR, we're a consortium of 15 research centers who conduct scientific research on food, land, and water systems in a climate crisis. That's our mandate. So I work for the International Water Management Institute, but what does that mean? Now, we analyze within the CG everything from river basins down to drought-resistant seeds. Now that brings us on to the Fragility, Conflict and Migration Initiative, which we kicked off in April 2023 with the objective of applying science in these areas, food, land, and water systems, and climate adaptation to improve policy and investment in FCM situations. So in short, we do research for development, but more importantly, perhaps for this group today, we do research for humanitarian and emergency response operations. We support disaster risk reduction and anticipatory action, and we support the multi-level governance systems that are required for success in these initiatives. Drought, flood, heat, dust, pests, these are all things which trigger emergencies and contribute to instability, which is what we're looking to respond to, right? So these also compound and make more complicated recovery and development situations in fragile and conflict-affected contexts. So for emergency and preventive interventions to be effective, we need applied system-level research. That's why the CGIAR and the International Water Management Institute are so excited about this partnership, to bring the science to the good work that's being done in the field. Because as we know, often humanitarian and emergency response operations don't always take that system level lens when it comes to natural resource systems, food systems, and so forth, when we're promoting recovery and intending for long-term impacts. We need more evidence to support the decision-making in emergency situations. So many of you sent in questions when you registered for this event, which was fantastic. Hopefully we can get through at least a small portion of them, but there are a lot of countries that are represented in the portfolio we're working on at the moment and on the panel today. This includes Ethiopia, Nigeria, Pakistan, Sudan. Hopefully some of my colleagues will be able to put some information in the chat that will be good information for folks to read and share. And please share anything you have that's relevant in the chat over the course of the event. And this will give us some good evidence to reflect on as we go through this discussion, but also through the webinar series over the next few months. But I also just wanted to point out that one of the reasons I'm excited about kicking off this webinar series today is because the things we're going to talk about today are on the global agenda. Look, we've got the COP28 Climate Relief, Recovery and Peace Declaration that was announced last year. that is directly relevant to the work that everyone here that we're going to talk about today is doing. This has also gotten into discussions of climate finance and bringing the FCM context better into global climate finance products and services. These situations need to be better provided for so that communities that are affected by fragility, conflict, and migration can build their capacity to adapt to climate just as well as traditional normal situations. So all of the work we're doing here, I see, falls into that system of building climate resilience. It's important for us to maintain that perspective, that there is that big picture. And all the wisdom that will be shared by the panel today and the future panels will be important to inform our action going forward, both for the emergencies of today, but also preventing those that could happen tomorrow. So this is why, like I said, we're extremely excited about this partnership. I'm going to stop talking there because there's so much that our panelists have to share today. So I'm going to pass it back to you, Xavi, now. And so I will stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandy. I will now invite Julianne Schillinger to address the audience. Julianne is the technical advisor for the Climate and Conflict Group at the Red Cross, Red Crescent Climate Center, and she's the co-lead of the Anticipation Hub's Conflict Working Group. Her research focuses armed conflict and climate change. Julianne.
Thank you, Sherry. Just to echo Sandy, it's amazing to see so many people here. I see quite some familiar faces from the Anticipatory Action and Conflict Working Group that Sari just mentioned in the Anticipation Hub. But I think more importantly, I see a lot of names that I'm not familiar with yet. And it's really great to have this webinar to get in touch with all of you. Let me just give you a little bit of background on the Anticipation Hub and on this working group as we're co-hosting this webinar today. The Anticipation Hub essentially is this large knowledge platform on anticipatory action broadly. We bring together a lot of different humanitarian organizations, but also development organizations, funding agencies, essentially a lot of international actors who are interested in advancing anticipatory action in all kinds of settings. And within this large community of practice, the Anticipatory Action and Conflict Working Group, as the name might indicate, looks at how we can make anticipatory action work in these very, very complex settings of conflict, of fragility, of violence. We co-chair this working group from the Climate Center side together with our colleagues at the FAO. I've already saw that Kim Christensen is also in the chat, who is our FAO colleague and co-chair of the group. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We will both be there to answer them throughout the webinar as well. Within the working group, we're essentially doing two things. One is just bringing people together to discuss these challenges that we're facing, very similar to what we're doing today in this webinar. So it's actually the perfect sneak peek of what the working group does. And just, talk about the logistical challenges, but also considerations of, for example, conflict sensitivity that is so important in conflict-affected settings and fragile settings. But we're also trying to advance the evidence base that we have. So we focus a lot on knowledge consolidation. What kind of experiences do different organizations have, and how can we bring them together to learn how to better adapt to fragile, to conflict-affected settings and to settings of mass migration, for example. And so that's really great to have partners like IWMI on board for it, because of course, as humanitarian organizations, we can bring in a lot of knowledge, but sometimes we need the researchers, right? Sometimes we need somebody to support us with this knowledge consolidation and to make sure that we turn all of this experience into practical guidance, into tools that can be used to improve the way that we're working. And so I'm really happy to have this partnership going very well, as I would say. And yeah, we will have a very, very interesting webinar today to kick off this 3-webinar series. And I'm just really looking forward to learn from our panelists to see what we can take from all of the different settings, what we can take from your experiences, and how to then take it further. So I think with that, I will wish us all a very, very interesting 1.5 hours. And Shari, back to you.
Thank you. I think you speak for all of us. This is going to be so interesting. So now it's time to turn the spotlight to our very global panel. Going alphabetically by first name, I'm going to start with Andrew Wheatley. Andy joins us from halfway up a mountain in Kenya. He first started working with the International Committee of the Red Cross back in 2006, but with breaks. Currently, he's with the ICRC as the Africa Regional Anticipatory Action Advisor for Climate Conflict. Makes him perfect for this webinar. He's previously also worked on crises in countries around the globe, including Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia, Bangladesh, Philippines, Nepal, Sierra Leone, El Salvador, Panama, Peru, and Brazil. There's more, but we let him tap into his extensive experience when we start the roundtable. Atto, researcher and climate adaptation specialist at the International Water Management Institute. Emmanuel has been with IWMI for a year, before which he was a researcher and postdoctoral scholar who developed a novel approach to integrate indigenous knowledge and scientific forecast data to enhance climate information services for adaptive water management and food production. He joins us from Colombo, Sri Lanka. Joining us also is Maysoon Badi from Doha, Qatar. Maysoon is an architect by training, and her practice and interests led her to the Sudan Urban Development Think Tank, where she is the CEO and program director. One of the focus areas of the SUDTT is the Daraja Tuti Island project, where there are overlapping challenges. Tuti Island is at the conjunction of the Blue Nile and the White Nile, and along with armed conflict and political upheaval, the area also sees flooding, riverbank erosion, and unmanaged urbanization. We'll hear more about the application of anticipatory action there very soon. And finally, Moira Mahara joins us from Harare, where she is the Country Emergency Coordinator for the Adventist Development and Relief Agency in Zimbabwe. She has previous expertise in implementing and planning community-based disaster management, disaster reduction, emergency preparedness, response planning, as well as emergency relief and recovery. And her work has taken her to Sudan, Kurdistan, Turkey, and Somalia. I can't thank you all enough for being with us. We're going to have such a rich dialogue thanks to your varied expertise and experiences from around the globe. So let's dive right in. Andy, we're going to start with you, not just because it's alphabetical, but given that you have worked in anticipatory action and as a conflict advisor at ICRC, can you give us an overview of AA and how it applies in fragile and conflict-affected settings? So just if you could share insight on how anticipatory action fits within the broader humanitarian and disaster risk reduction.
Sure, thanks, and greetings from Kenya, and hello everyone. Big questions, and an issue I'll perhaps just touch on, but hopefully raise a few issues we can return to in the conversations and any questions that arise. I mean, as I think most people here know, I mean, anticipatory action, what is it? It's really about pre-agreed actions to pre-identified threats, ideally negotiated with likely affected populations, but not always, and perhaps that's a particular challenge in conflict. And then agreed triggers for action and agreed funding to support that. So it's, I mean, anticipatory action, it may be a new name, but effectively it's trying to achieve what we've been seeking to do for a long time, which is help a highly reactive and often slower than desired industry be a little bit more front-footed, a little bit more able to respond speedily and hopefully in a relevant and effective manner. All of that particularly challenging within a conflict situation. And I guess perhaps my first concern or sort of slight discomfort when talking about this is what do we mean by conflict? You know, that's a very short, simple word for a real variety of situations. Some are relatively stable, some provide access, but many are not. And so, you know, if we think of Ukraine, Somalia, Colombia, Nigeria today, all are very, very different. So perhaps there's a challenge, I think, within the industry and within all our organizations to be a little bit more nuanced to this. It's all about context, and perhaps humanitarians are not as good at context as we should be. So I suppose in that sense, it's hard to talk about, you know, fragile and conflict-affected states. That caveat aside, it seems almost well, very obvious to say, you know, conflict, there's huge challenges around staff security, around access to communities with very limited community contact. Often drives displacement, so there is that inherent fragility to the context we're working in, and that's on top of you know, all the sort of nature of a lot of the work in the context we work in, you know, which are inherently fragile as well, with, you know, weak governance, socioeconomic inequality, underinvestment in infrastructure and services, inadequate environmental management, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's adding an extra layer of complication to already difficult working environments that I'm sure everybody in this call is familiar with. So where does that lead us? I think anticipatory action in this context is perhaps about helping us be a little bit more effective and relevant, responsive, speedy, or certainly timely, and ideally through improved community contact, responding with dignity as well. So we're actually providing what it is that is a priority for those we're seeking to assist.
Right. What
So
the community
I guess within that,
actually
there's
needs.
exactly, and again, I think that's something that's very challenging in the humanitarian environment. I think we'll talk a very good game about community engagement. I think we often struggle to put that in practice, and that's additionally a challenge in conflict environments. So perhaps there's an issue of mindset. You know, our comfort zone, certainly in many organizations I've worked for, is very much on responding and not, you know, taking time to think and plan and position ourselves.
True.
And so I think there's a challenge there.
And I think we'll hear a little bit about that from our
Yeah.
other panelists as well. I can think of a few experiences they've shared before. So we'll move on to Maysoon, who is from a very conflict-ridden setting. Maysoon, in your capacity at the SUDDT and your experience, what has been the role of AA in improving resilience and disaster preparedness in Sudan, which is a very, very fragile setting? I know that you've dealt with things that Andy talked about, including with involving the community or actually giving the community what's necessary. Could you speak to that, please?
Thank you, Shavi, for having me, and thank you for the question. Indeed, well, echoing what you just said in the introduction, that working in a fragile setting is very complicated because of the heightened risk of conflict, disaster, and crisis, and the recurrent nature of these risks. So, and even to the anticipatory action takes the lead because of its, like you said, its proactive approach. And within a conflict-affected settings, and in this I speak from firsthand about this, the problem is the community's needs are changing and they're constantly fluctuating, and you will need real-time intelligence to be able to respond to those changing needs. And even more complicated, sometimes you wouldn't be able to access these communities. So in this, the right approach, I would say, is that anticipatory action helps you engage with these communities before the crisis, and therefore better involve them in the design of protective solutions and actions. Therefore, they localizing these actions and promoting ownership. You're reaching out for other actors and stakeholders who are important part of this process, and you're building the capacities of all of these during this process. And so you're not just addressing an immediate need or an immediate risk, but you are building this adaptive capacity and the ability of the communities to endure risk, not only the one you've predicted, but also ones that you were not able to anticipate. And a very good example of this is what we've witnessed while working with Tuti Island, where, of course, this island, despite its very vulnerable location in the confluence of both two Niles, was able to endure recurrent floods over the years, while other communities were devastated by these events. And the secret is preparedness. They were very prepared for that risk. And they have developed their own ways and lead these ways of anticipating the risks and mitigating it. But even more importantly, what we witnessed during the conflict, which is unanticipated, is that they have adapted and transformed these ways to deal with new challenges and new needs for the community. So they found themselves under siege with no access to food, water, but they have adapted their ways to mitigate this risk and distribute meals and negotiate with the armed forces for safe access. And so this is what we want to learn from Tuti and take to other communities, this community-led anticipatory action. And we hope we are able to develop that in all communities, urban and non-urban.
You're muted, Ade. Sorry, you're muted.
Oh, I was, yeah, sorry. So it sounds like it has to be a really custom fit, like it has to fit the community in their need, in their location and geography. Thank you so much for sharing that. We'll move on to Emmanuel, who's worked in a similar way with an early warning system and climate adaptation. So can you discuss the role of these in anticipatory actions and how they can effectively be implemented in FCAS to mitigate risks and work with the community to prepare them?
Thank you very much, Shavi, and hello, everyone. So I've often said that an anticipatory action without an early warning system is just like a human body without its senses. So for example, a human body without a touch, without a feel, without a vision. Because AI and early warning system are that important. It gives that opportunity to be able to tell what is really approaching so that we'll be able to prepare adequately. And it's so important that it is estimated about 35 billion USD per year is what we are likely to save as a result of implementing AA to save us from disasters. But most people do not still have this early warning system. And when you go to conflict affected regions, it is very critical that these early warning systems are also included and crafted in a well-fashioned manner so that these communities could benefit. It is not surprising that the top 25 most vulnerable climate countries, out of these, 19 of them are the fragile and conflict-prone areas. So you could see the link actually between the early warning value and that of the conflict-prone areas. So recently in 2022, there is a call by the UN General Secretary that there should be early warning system for all, which we all know. And there have been about 3.1 billion USD allocated for that for the next 5 years. But what is more critical is that when it comes to AA, early warning play these three key roles that I want to really talk about. The first one is that it provides us with accurate and timely information for us to be able to anticipate the impending hazard in a way that we can prepare towards it. Now, it doesn't only provide us with the hazard information. By extension, we can also have risk information. And risk information that we try to get a hazard, if it is flood or it is drought, we are trying to include the extent to which the community is exposed or is sensitive to this particular hazard and come out with a more robust risk information. So with this, communities are able to prepare very adequately towards responding to the impending hazard and developing a robust AA protocol. Now, to implement an early warning system in conflict-prone areas, it is critical that in these areas are very sensitive. So context issues are very important. How do we look at the socio-political, cultural, environmental factors that are already prevailing causing conflict? Can we also look at designing this AA in a way that is very conflict sensitive? And when I mean conflict sensitive, I'm talking about the social tensions, the power that is influencing all these kind of discussions in the country or in a particular region that we're talking about. Now, there's something I always say, bring your own infrastructure. Most of these communities are very vulnerable. They lack infrastructure and perhaps institutional arrangements are also very poor. And so we need to carry our own technologies and innovation. And this brings us to the idea that the state-of-the-art AI system can help us. And the state-of-the-art kind of a cloud sourcing system can help us. So I will talk about this more maybe as we go the conversation that way. But more inclusiveness is important. Capacity building are also very relevant in this quest to make early warning system important for communities that are more fragile.
Thank you, Emmanuel. I want to switch gears slightly now to talk about an area that is often neglected when it comes to conflict and also in fragile settings, which is finance and the economy. Moira, you've had a lot of experience, and as the country emergency coordinator for ADRA in Zimbabwe, what are ways that you work to integrate different tools with anticipatory actions? Can you share some specific examples where you've built resilience and addressed needs in finance and the economy in unstable environments?
Thank you, Shabi, and thank you to the previous speakers. Good morning and good afternoon to those people who are listening in from all corners of the world. Greetings from Zimbabwe. So when there's conflict or the context is fragile, markets are disrupted, and this is when you see the 4 pillars of food security being affected, which are availability of food, access, utilization, and also stability. You also tend to see low production because industries are often affected, especially in the cases of conflict, and people often lose their jobs. So the national income will also fall and inflation will also increase because people will have money, but they will have limited goods to actually purchase. There's no economic growth, and usually economic recession tends to set in. So you find that governments then launch appeals to donors, NGOs, and other entities for funding. But the context as it is now, you see that there are so many fragile contexts. There's so much instability. So there's so much demand for funding from all corners of the world. And you see that the demand is actually exceeding the resources that are available. So you find that prioritization is now not really being given to anticipatory action. And this is left to long-term projects rather than short-term projects. And when you look at funding, the funding structures now, you find that the shorter-term projects actually exceed the longer-term projects, which then creates a lot of complexities. So I'm just also going to hasten to say that coupled in fragile contexts also experience a breakdown in infrastructure. Water infrastructure like bakeries are destroyed in Iraq. Roads in Somalia were also disrupted when I was there because of the insurgencies that were going on. So let me quickly move on to the tools that can be integrated into anticipatory actions. So these tools may be developed for food security, for climate, for WASH, and this can now be consolidated into the integrated phase classification, which we call the IPC in the programming world. So the IPC collects data on economic, climatic, and other variables that may be required by the conflict or fragile context that will be there. So we can also integrate teams from different segments through cluster and working groups, that is government teams, NGO teams, private sector, and academic institutions. I know my time is very short, so I'm trying to feed in everything.
Yeah,
so on your
last
question, I think you asked me to give specific examples of resilience building. So when building resilience programs, there are three capacities that we need to look at, which are absorptive or anticipatory capacities, which we are discussing today, to minimize the shocks such as the early warning systems, the emergency response, the DRR plans. So maybe let me focus on the examples.
Maybe
So,
just one.
yes, just one.
Yeah.
I'll give an example from Zimbabwe, where we've provided inputs, seed in anticipation of drought. And then we've also provided livestock support in anticipation also of animals being affected by the drought. Thank you, and over to you, Xavi.
Thank you. I wish we had more time for everybody. We'll just have to come back tomorrow. So please, same time, same place, everyone. Moving on, Andy, could you highlight some successes that ICRC has achieved in anticipatory action implementation in conflict settings such as Somalia?
Sure, absolutely. And Somalia is a great example. I think perhaps the first and only situation I can think of where ICRC has used climate data to anticipate, prepare for, and respond to a crisis before it actually happened. That came about because of the strength of meteorological predictions. In this case, it was for El Nino flooding that was strongly indicated for southern Somalia. There were predictions in early June, forecasting models all said the same thing. And that was basically our trigger to go.
And how much lead time did you have?
We had, it was June before expected flooding in October, so about 8-9 weeks, which was gold dust. It's never enough, but if we look at most of the situations we're involved in around humanitarian work and particularly conflict, we're always playing catch up. So this gave us an amazing window to plan, procure, negotiate, discuss the who, what, where, how ahead of those rains, which ultimately displaced about 1.2 million people. So that gave us an opportunity. And in the end, I mean, I don't want to talk about numbers, but just give a sort of scale. We're talking about approximately 100,000 households assisted through water provision, healthcare, health centers supported and kept open, livelihood support, shelter kits, cash, etc. So I think there was a good story to tell there, and I think we perhaps surprised ourselves, but coming to this in the way that we did. And that sort of brings me to the sort of primary challenges and perhaps some of the solutions. I think that there's a need to accept risk and a high level of risk acceptance on the part of management. And I'd love to say that's something we can always guarantee. No, I think it comes down to personalities. And in this situation, we had a management team who were convinced by the data and were willing to act on that data. I don't think that's always replicable. So I think that there's an inherent challenge there. Finding data, in this case climate data, and particularly in situations like Somalia where that's a real challenge. We almost stumbled across our key partners. FAO were brilliant, and surprisingly Google provided some amazing stuff, including rolling 5-day alerts on likely riverine flood levels, which again, hugely useful in terms of being able to develop, take forward, and deliver projects. I think learning how to interpret data and helping climate scientists speak humanitarian and vice versa was a really interesting challenge, and a willingness to trust that data. And then perhaps the last couple of points, financial flexibility really helps. We're in a privileged position within ICRC, but perhaps, more broadly agreeing crisis modifiers with donors may be one way of overcoming some of these delays. Touched on the planning window. Final thing I'll say is, I think the strongest areas of that response were those that were not logistically heavy. It was using those 8 weeks to reinforce water points. It was about using those 8 weeks to resupply and physically strengthen health centers. that's where we had our big successes. Cash, shelter kits, hygiene kits, we didn't quite get that right. I'll stop there and can say a little bit more if you're interested.
Yeah, well, we'll come back, and I think our audience will have questions as well. But yeah, I guess you have to do the best you can and count your wins when you get them. Mm-hmm. So speaking of wins, Maysoon, what are the key indicators of success in implementing initiatives in fragile and conflict-affected settings when you perform anticipatory actions? How would you measure your success?
Well, okay. In general, I would think success would be based on three aspects of to measure it. You based on how effective your intervention was and the partnerships established with the key actors in the system and system improvements and the value of the capacity building interventions and how they were able to reduce the impact of risk and to ultimately help the communities be better prepared for risk. So you want to develop smart indicators. And you have to design them with the community or the local stakeholders. So they have to be local specific. You can't just copy and paste them. And for an example, in our intervention in Tuti Island, what does success mean? Success means that we want to strengthen the community's resilience and adaptive capacity towards weather and climate related hazards. And so, like Andrew and Emmanuel just previously stated here, thank you for stating the importance of meteorological predictions and early warning in improving that. So our project is all about improving access to weather and climate information and early warning and improving the use of this information. So we want to make sure that it comes in the right time, in the right format, through the most trusted and appropriate channels to the community, and that they actually understand it. And it comes in very clear, actionable advice. And so to measure that, we have developed a set of indicators that measure qualitatives and quantitatives criteria. So I'll give you an example. For example, you want to measure the effectiveness of your partnership. So you want to, you could have data on how many organizations participated in the co-design of this service, how many organizations are participating in the dissemination of the information, how many people are accessing this information, and how many people are actually using this information. You also want to measure the impact of actually having this information. So you want to measure, for example, the type and value of the properties and assets lost or damaged, the loss of lives, the affected source of livelihoods. You can have numerical indicators for that. And qualitative indicators could be, I will give you here an example. How do people access this information? What are their preferences? And how do they use it once they, and how good they understand it? And so we collect all this information. And here it is very important to develop this feedback channels and multi-communication channel with the users, the forecasters on one hand and the community to be able to collect constant feedback and improve the process. And so and what we want to do is to have this incremental process of developing this weather and climate information services. I think also we might touch on the importance of disaggregating the data in gender, disability, youth, just to make sure that you involve social inclusion, gender equality, and so just to make sure of that. I think, yeah. Over to you. You're muted.
My next question is for Emmanuel, who has also worked in deploying early warning systems and using these tools in FCAS. Emmanuel, what are some instances where it's worked, when you've used all the data and you have this dialogue with the community and you've actually reduced the impact of the hazard in your area?
Yeah, so there are always challenges when it comes to implementing this early warning system. I mean, typically, developing and deploying early warning system undergoes several processes. For example, the risk knowledge, monitoring and warning services, disseminating the information, and even the community responding to this. And this actually requires institutional coordination, requires technical infrastructure. Now, so imagine a country without conflict, even having these kind of problems. So what will happen in a conflict-prone area? The situation exacerbates. So it exacerbates existing technical challenges, and at the same time, it's creating new ones. So when it comes to the challenge, I want to touch a bit on the challenges, and I can give you an instance of some successes. But because the challenges is what we must identify and probably work towards that. So the first one that I always say is about the technical challenges from my side, and there are safety concerns. Safety concerns not for the people there, but even for external people who want to go to the ground and try to help the local meteorological, hydrometeorological agencies to build their capacities. There is also lack of technical infrastructure. In conflict-prone areas, it's very difficult sometimes to get internet, power supply to support a very robust and advanced early warning system. Now, when we come to the operational challenges also, it is important that we identify that there are some financial limitations. So some countries that are conflict prone are not even supported, do not have donor support because they are perhaps they are not democratic enough, or they have issues that do not allow finances to flow to those countries. There are also certain political challenges. Even the government can equally resist this early warning system, because some people may try to manipulate the information for their own political gains. If there's flood coming or there's no flood coming, people can twist the information for people to use. So these are some of the challenges that are likely to happen. Now, if I want to tell you about success stories, one thing is that we have not been able to come out with effective tools in trying to even evaluate the true value that we gain from this early warning system. Now, even though it exists, but the approaches towards this are not so much effective. But let me say, for example, in Somalia, there was a famine early warning system network that was developed. And in 2017, for example, the system was able to predict the drought that enabled humanitarian organizations to mobilize resources and implement certain kind of measures to help avert the situation. And if you read about Oxfam report or a discussion paper that Oxfam actually wrote on that, it tells you how the preparation started because of the early warning information in April for the drought to happen in 2017. From April 2016 to the latter part for the drought to happen in 2017. And that is not the only situation. Even in South Sudan, there have been instances where FAO with WFP have also developed some of these early warning systems to identify food insecurity hotspots, especially the 2020 flood situation in Sudan. Amid the COVID situation, everybody was on a rush to get solution to that flood situation. And through early warning system, there were some solution provided. Even recently in the news, last year, South Sudan has launched a robust early warning system to improve that process. So when it comes to cyclones, I mean, we have had a lot of examples in Yemen that have developed, even flood in early warning system in Afghanistan that have been able to use this early warning system to evacuate people from, or to use the early warning system, early warning information to develop proactive measures to evacuate people from affected areas. Even within the Sahel, also, agreement has provide some of these early warning information. Sometimes they provide long-term seasonal forecasts. That is very good for almost all the country within the Sahel, Mali, and Burkina Faso to be able to make decisions. So generally, we have been able to see patches of the benefits that we derive from this early warning system. But what is next for us to start thinking about is how do we actually estimate this benefit and make it more quantitative in order to make a case for the benefit of our
and then to scale it up. Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Moira, Emmanuel also mentioned this, and so did Andy. When infrastructure is affected, what methods or strategies have you employed to ensure effective anticipatory actions when you can't reach the place you're trying to assist? I know you've had experiences about that. If you could share that very briefly. We're running late. I'm sorry to squeeze you, but...
Okay. All right. So I'm going to give an example of a voucher program that we did for a Syria response remotely from Turkey. It's easier to plan for a weather-based anticipatory action rather than for a conflict one. But for this one, we ensured that we had robust standard operating procedures, that we signed agreements with a service provider, Red Cross in Turkey, to print vouchers for us, because initially we wanted to distribute food, but because of access and security, we could not reach out to the beneficiaries in Syria. So we also made sure that the markets were accessible. We did a market assessment. We selected traders to undertake the provision of food. And we worked very closely, like across the departments, finance and compliance, because in a situation like this, there's high risk of diversion of funds. So it was also important that we worked with a local partner, which speaks to the localization agenda. In AA, worked with a local partner who knew the context, who knew the communities, who were able to select beneficiaries because they were within Syria. And then our M&D teams also worked strongly just to analyze the database and to make sure that we didn't have duplications or we didn't have undeserving people on the distribution list. So as part of this, coordination was also key, because we got like knowledge from the cash working group in Turkey to determine like the size of the assistance that we're going to give to the communities. So technology was also key, especially for database management and for sending messages to Syria. So the challenges quickly were accessibility, security, and availability of food within Syria, but we managed to overcome all those. Thank you, and over.
Thank you so much. It sounds extremely challenging, and I'm sure it was a very fraught time for you. But speaking of scaling up, when you're taking something locally and then also trying to build from it, Andy, you'd also talked about this. Maybe I'll address this question to you, Andy. What strategies have you seen employed to scale up these actions to have systemic impacts that you think have worked so that they can move from one conflict setting and then be applied with some success in a different conflict setting?
Sure, and I will try and keep this short in the interest of time. I think in terms of those strategies, and again, very much drawing on Somalia, I think increasing that institutional awareness and trust and understanding of the science, climate science, but also epidemiological science as well. So decision makers know what it means, understand it, and also perhaps crucially know who to turn to, where that information can be sourced. And I think one of the surprises coming from Somalia was even in a resource poor environment like that, there was actually a surprising amount of information available, particularly around climate issues. And to Emmanuel's point, there's no good having information if you don't use it, linking warning to action. So trusting in the science and internal, I don't want to use the word training, but internal comfort with that information and what it means can go a long way to the other point I raised, raising that risk appetite. That's not a strategy as such, but agreeing beforehand institutionally the scope and focus of programming, what information means, building that knowledge and understanding what's in front of senior managers is crucial for actually then seeing information turned into action. Capable local partner almost goes without saying, and I also didn't say it in my mention of Somalia, where all our work was with and through the Somali Red Crescent. Hugely important in terms of helping meaningful delivery. That preparedness window I touched on, absolutely crucial, along with sort of rolling for more sort of operationally focused forecasts where those are possible. Again, epidemiological information where we're talking about health risks, understanding, using, and adjusting programming based on that. It's all about the preparedness. It's all about linking into that contingency planning and doing that with local partners, stocks, training, simulations. That leads to another challenge, which is keeping that process live over time. We all suffer from serious staff turnover, institutional memory loss, etc. So being aware of that and keeping those contingencies well known.
Right.
Crowding in others, not trying to do it all yourself. In the Somali example, we've lent heavily on BBC Media Action for reaching out for information as aid, but also as feedback. So hugely important there. And perhaps the last couple of points, linking with GRR, I mean, what's one of the key lessons that have come out of the Somali experience now is retrofitting is timely and inexpensive. Get it right to start with. Build in resilience to water points, water systems from the start, which is something that's now, the current planning for Somalia. Learning. Or more importantly, sharing learning and turning that into action. Back to Maysoon's point around AAP, yes, reaching out, and I think I think all organizations have a real challenge in actually listening and acting on feedback from local communities.
I'm sure
Final
everybody
point.
in the audience is able to
Yeah.
relate to that. Sorry, if you have a last thing.
I was just going to say the last point really is that I think there is a trade-off between scale and inclusivity and community engagement. And I think that's something we need to recognize. What the solution is to that is probably contextual, but it's a massive challenge. And how we deal with that, let's discuss.
That's what we're here for. Speaking of inclusivity and getting your partners to trust you, especially governments that also come and go quite frequently in conflict-afflicted situations. So you may have buy-in, you may not. Let's talk about the trust for the science. Emmanuel, my question is for you. What are some ways you have integrated innovative technologies and data-driven approaches in the early warning systems in FCAS that have worked, that have had buy-in from stakeholders across the board?
Yeah, so we have a project on Climber, and we developed an integrated early warning system that was extremely technologically driven and also data driven. And the idea is that technology should help us to integrate all the structures of the early warning, the early action, which is AA, and also the early financing. So for those of you who want to see that, you can go aware and then you can have access to that. But in the process of developing this technological platform, we came across so many challenges. And the first one is that how to have access to data, right? So the data collection and analysis is often very difficult. So there are new state-of-art technologies like remote sensing and satellite imagery that was able to help us to collect real-time data set for analysis. And one thing also is that some data sets are very complex and also very vast and large amount of data set. So how do we do this? We need big data analytics. So we need capacity to be built to be able to use this big data analytics. Now, in communicating this information even to users, policymakers, that is also another area that you have to think about it critically. Mobile technology is one of them. And not only mobile technology, even Internet of Things that such as the use of weather stations that can gather data and send it remotely immediately. These are all information collection and exchange kind of mediums that we have to think about. The most critical part of it is also about the analysis of data, the AI. In the generation of in the system where we have AI, how could AI help us with the hazard information to predict the risks of food security, risks of internal displacement, risks of health? So in our system, we're able to use a bit of an application of AI to see and also compare it to what the normal system is able to predict. So to be able to upscale, we need to really go into technology at the same time to collect a lot of data. But more importantly, there's a cloud computing that can reduce a lot of costs. So instead of buying your own server, you can pay for a cloud computing to do all this processing for you. But this also presents another challenge, which is who owns the data, who decide on when the data should be used, and who accepts or agrees on the kind of technology that should be used to develop the information that we want to. So the whole process was very revealing with a lot of challenges, but the state-of-the-art technology has proven to be able to give us the opportunity to create inclusivity, to create a timeliness of information that we give, and also to be able to adapt the information as and when it is important to be adapted. So we need to go to more state-of-the-art technology and more data-driven early warning system to improve the AA. Thank you.
Thank you. And the better data you have and the better you showcase it, the more trust you have and the more buy-in from stakeholders.
And participatory approaches as well. We don't forget about that. What develop participatory approaches in data collection? Not only the technology, but people have their own inherent knowledge about their own environment that can also feed into this particular data set. So we should start thinking about local knowledge, traditional knowledge that can also feed into anyone.
Absolutely going to come back to that. Speaking of participations, partnerships, and multi-stakeholder collaborations, Maysoon, could you talk to us about how one can use these to scale up anticipatory actions for urban resilience?
Thank you. Collaboration in anticipatory action, this is the key for success. You need to, of course, pool these limited resources, expertise, and networks, and try to create a comprehensive approach to the risk, and maybe also, result in a system-wide improvement. And so you want to have this. It is the best way is to take this multi-stakeholder approach and work with and connect with and work through all the players in the system. And this is important for effective implementation, but also it's very important to scale, even more important for scaling up. And now in a conflict-affected setting, this is even more critical because, for example, I'll give an example from the Raja in Tuti Island. We were not able to access the community anymore. So we have to partner with local actors and local community-based organizations, people who are actually there on the ground to actually be able to communicate and reestablish communication with the community. In other contexts, you will have it's very difficult to establish trust with hard-to-reach communities. So you also have to partner with organizations, humanitarian organizations, or CBOs that already have this trust, and you can communicate through them. And when you talk about scaling up, then also, it's not just cooperation in the local level or the national, but it also becomes important in the regional level. For example, we are now in the new project, the Raja project, where we're scaling it up to the national level. We created this partnership between ICPAC and SMA. The ICPAC is the Regional Climate Prediction and Application Center for East Africa, and the Sudan Meteorological Authority. And this was important because the operations of Sudan Meteorological Authority has been greatly impacted by the conflict. So this is a way of stabilizing their contribution and their activities. And so yes, again, partnerships are very important. And here, I take this opportunity to emphasize the importance of partnering with local NGOs, CBOs, and CSOs like us, because of like I said, the valuable input they have with using the trust they've already established with the community, the local knowledge. And when you cooperate with them, you're not only promoting local ownership of the project, but you're also raising the capacities of these organizations. You are enabling to access more resources, capacity building. You are also increasing their visibility and credibility, and so forth. You can raise their capacity to not only help you and support you in anticipatory action, but maybe lead anticipatory action in the future.
That's right.
And that's what we want, localized.
Yes, so important. And if you can't overstate how the community buy-in and of course the effect matters. Moira, in your experience, you've seen actions like this that are local, community-led, also being integrated into national policies and frameworks. Could you address how that has played out and where you've seen how it works?
Oh, thanks for that. I just wanted to start off by saying sometimes it's easier said than done. Because when you look at the example that I'm going to give of Iraq, they've been like overlapping disasters. People putting plans and frameworks in anticipation or to support people who've been affected by the war. Then a drought sets in. And then as people are recovering from the drought, another war sets in, like is currently happening, that there's instability in the region. But all things being equal, I think for a sustainable and scalable solution, it is important to strengthen early warning systems and preparedness systems as well. It is also important to design programs which encourage economic diversification and livelihood support. It is also important to plan on infrastructural development and restoration, as the other speakers have been talking about, restoration of water systems, restoration of reconstruction of dams and buildings and so forth. It is also important to ensure that service delivery is enhanced for sustainability. And it is also important to have social cohesion and community stabilization. And as Maysoon said, this is the role, the big role that local partners play in this. And it is also important to have community-based approaches, as Andrew was talking about the DRR planning for the communities. So I'll just briefly talk about what is happening in Iraq in terms of policy provisions for anticipatory action. So there's the National Development Plan 2018 to 2022, which focused on improving disaster preparedness and resilience. There was also the DRR strategy of 2014. And you find that for effective anticipatory action activities to take place, this is not only for Iraq, but even for other countries, it's important to have a Civil Protection Act and also DRR strategies to support those acts. There's also the climate change and environment policy, which was enacted for 2013 to 2017. And then there are community-based approaches, which include local capacitating of local DRR committees, strengthening of early warning systems, as I mentioned earlier. So I think in a nutshell, this is what is being done and has been done in Iraq to support anticipatory action. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you. That was really comprehensive, and appreciate your sharing that. We're actually ready to move on to the questions. People in the audience have questions for you. I'll just channel them. The insight you've shared, the personal insights you've shared from the region have been amazing. So let's also now involve the audience. The first question, Maysoon, is for you from Faith. And she said, it is clear that the current designed anticipatory action may have limited application in FCS. While projects like SUDDT, 2T Island are usually underfunded in conflict settings, they help to collect robust evidence we need to improve the framework in FCS. How can we scale this up? So if you'd like to add to your answer, Maysoon, something more specific, that would be really wonderful.
True, and it's exactly what Faith has rightfully said. It's very difficult to allocate funding for these projects, specifically actually after the war, where some funding was actually withdrawn, and we fought to keep funding. And so with whatever limited funding, it's very smart to actually plan and design a very small intervention that can practically showcase, you know, the effectiveness and the ability that you are able to apply this project in this, especially for 2T Island. We wanted to showcase that we can still work with this hard to reach community. And then you want to demonstrate the impact of this intervention, this very small intervention. And then you can showcase it to the donors and say, okay, I've done this. Can you give me more money to do that? And so you can, you know, scale up this project. And that's exactly what happened with 2T Island. I mean, having a regional partner participate in this very small project and a national partner like Sudan Meteorological Authority is all about them wanting to demonstrate that they can operate and they can improve the situation. And therefore, now we are able to access bigger funding and to scale this up to the national level.
I think that's amazing. Thank you so much. We have plenty more questions. I'll keep rolling. Emmanuel, there's a question from Ojong who's asked, rural communities often have indigenous knowledge, which they incorporate in their resilience strategies. Can you share examples where early warning systems have integrated the indigenous knowledge for anticipatory actions?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. I mean, in Ghana, for example, we did a research, and the research actually started because we went to the field to see whether seasonal forecasts from models are really good for farmers to predict the events ahead of time, particularly rainfall. When we got there, these farmers told us that we don't like using anything from the meteorological agency. So the question is, if you don't use that, then what do you really use? And their response, we use our own knowledge because we understand our own environment. And that was the beginning of the research that seeks to understand what is actually this indigenous knowledge, identifying them, and for the first time, try to estimate the skills or the accuracy of these indigenous forecast indicators that they use in a more semi-quantitative manner. Now, after finding out, we find out that sometimes they can be as much as 75 to 80% accurate in predicting their own rainfall, for example. And if you can predict your own rainfall, it's likely you can predict an event of flood, depending on the extent of the rainfall. We also find out that if we integrate this scientific forecast, which is coming from a meteorological agency, with indigenous forecast together, it's able to perform better than indigenous forecast and scientific forecast in isolation. And so that really, we develop, I led that research, and so we develop a methodology together with some other colleagues. We develop a methodology to try to quantify, to integrate this in a more mathematical, but at the same time, using the WMO more standardized approaches like a categorical forecast verification methods and stuff like that. So indeed, the result was useful for the Ghana Meteorological Agency. But as to the uptake of these kind of results, is still something that we are looking at as to which institutions are more interested in this integration, or which institutions will love to integrate this into early warning system for the benefit of farmers and all that. So indeed, early warning systems, including indigenous knowledge or traditional knowledge into early warning system, has proven useful. I mean, as for example, as a case study in Ghana, not only in the north of Ghana, we did also in the south of Ghana, we got the same result. But the challenge, however, is that the indicators that these indigenous people use are context specific. So they are not universal parameters or indicators. So it becomes a bit challenging. More resources need to go to it. when you want to work with each community, because every community has their own indicators. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. Andy, we have a comment for you and a question. Mark has said that he really appreciated your candor about what didn't work, and the partnerships were great to hear as well, particularly with Google. The question is from Solomon, who said, did you experience AA in a very short and limited time, say 36 hours to even 12 hours, when the warning for a disaster, for example, in case of a hurricane, was this short? If yes, what learned lessons could you share with us?
Sorry, was that at me?
Yes,
I
Andy,
lost
yes.
connection briefly.
Oh, did you
Sorry,
hear the compliment?
I didn't actually, but
Oh, no.
I'll take it. No need to repeat it. Could you just repeat the question, please?
Yes. So Solomon is asking if you've experienced AA with a very short and limited time frame, like 12 hours to 36 hours before a disaster, say a hurricane, and if yes, what learned lessons could you share with us?
The short answer is no, I haven't. The ICRC focus is on conflict and conflict environments, so it would tend to be the IFRC, the Federation, and national societies that work on issues such as those natural disasters.
Okay. Maybe I can ask Emmanuel if he's ever had to work on something with that short notice.
Yes, in some cases, what we notice is that with the short early warning system, for example, the time scale. So, of course, this information can range between a day to a week, or from a week to a month and stuff like that. But the shorter the time period, the more accurate the results are. And meanwhile, people who really need the decision, who really want to make these decisions, require the information in a more longer time scale. So for farmers, for example, would like to know information perhaps in a more like a month ahead of the time before they made a decision. Yeah, Andrew want to say something, I think. Yeah.
Sure. Sorry, just one thing that did occur to me while you were saying that, Emmanuel, is it's similar, I guess. I talked about these rolling forecasts, 5-day rolling riverine forecasts from Google, which were extraordinarily useful and very accurate. That was extremely useful in helping us fine-tune our activities, and also with that outreach to communities, mainly one way, to be honest, in terms of information as aid through local authorities, through local radio stations saying, you know, we're expecting increased river levels in a short period of time. So that allowed information to flow, and communities in some areas were quite used to flooding, so the sort of natural plan kicked in. It was more interesting in areas that were far less used to flooding. There was a issue. Well, okay, well, great, but what can I do with this information? So there's something of a challenge there at a time when, you know, when we were also affected by those floods, it limited our ability to respond with some of the traditional responses.
Moira, would you like to add something to that?
Yes, I just wanted to give an example of a WASH project where we had to do anticipatory activity planning and then respond to a cholera outbreak in one of the districts called Muzarapani in Zimbabwe this year, based on early warnings that we're getting from the Ministry of Health. So we managed to get small funding. It was a small area, a small population that was exposed to cholera. So we managed to plan and distribute non-food items before the outbreak actually took place. The outbreak did take place, but only a few people. We had one death, and only a few other people were affected by the cholera outbreak. Thank you, and over.
That's amazing. That is a good point to end this on, because it is slightly upbeat, and I'm sure all of us would agree that we're talking about such tense situations where it's so difficult and challenging for all of the practitioners to have a positive effect and timely, while preserving all kinds of access as well as dignity. So thank you very, very much for your questions. I know we didn't get to some of the questions that were sent in previously when people registered, but we'll end here. I'm sure we can keep this conversation going. And I really, really thank all of our panelists for such an engaging, insightful discussion. You've been wonderful. Your experiences have really, really provided all of us with a much deeper understanding of how AA can play a very crucial role in fragile and conflict-affected settings, particularly, of course, in improving food, land, and water systems. So thank you again. Today's webinar was set to highlight the importance of proactive measures along with community involvement and the use of innovative technologies to build resilience and then mitigate risks in challenging environments. We've seen that while the challenges are significant, the potential for transformative change is even greater. So we appreciate all the inspiration and the optimism that you have brought us. I'd also like to extend a heartfelt thank you to the audience for your active participation and thought-provoking questions. Your engagement is vital in fostering a collaborative environment where we learn from each other and work towards common goals. Additionally, I want to express our gratitude to CGIAR FCM Initiative and IWMI for helping us focus really on food, land, and water systems in these fragile contexts. Nina Nohai, who is leading the FCM Anticipatory Action Community of Thinking, the COT, really just made this webinar happen. And I also, of course, want to thank the Anticipation Hub's Anticipatory Action and Conflict Working Group, again, for their contributions and support in organizing this webinar. I'd like to invite Sandy from IWMI to say a last few words to everyone, and then I have some information on future webinars as well as the Berlin webinar that's coming up. So don't go away yet. If you can stay a couple of minutes longer, I will give you information on the Global Dialogue platform on anticipatory humanitarian action as well. Sandy, please.
Thank you, Xavi. So I'll keep this brief. I know everybody's got to get to their next thing, but this has been really enlightening. I mean, actually, thinking of looking forward, all the forecasting and planning that we keep talking about doing. We've had some really interesting conversation about the breakdown of systems, but there's also a lot to think about going forward. We've talked about physical breakdowns, institutional breakdowns, breakdown of social capital and how that's affecting whether or not people trust data, if they use it, whether they're the responders or the affected, and so on. All this breakdown, which leads to all the different kinds of vulnerabilities that folks here on the call have tried to address through the work that they do. So I just wanted to point out that one thing that as I'm listening to these experiences, I'm thinking, as we go through these FCM situations, the places where we work are also very dynamic. They're also changing, right? People are moving. Sometimes they're forcibly displaced. Camps are being set up. Peri-urban areas are growing quickly. Food systems are exploding or being disrupted, interrupted, all kinds of things, right? So as we plan these systems, anticipatory action in these situations, and how to do this work most effectively, probably the biggest challenge ahead for us is not just how do I do it knowing what I know today, but as we continue to work together to develop good practice, how do we continue to do good work in thinking about how these systems are going to change in the places where we work going forward? It's like chasing a moving target, and it always will be. But that's what's so exciting, I think, about talking as a group together about these experiences, is how much we can learn about how each person working in the field has adapted under extraordinary circumstances. So thank you, everybody, for everything you've shared. There's a lot of food for thought for sessions going forward. If you have topics or suggestions for what you'd like to hear about in webinars going forward, share it in the chat. We welcome that. Okay, so thank you very much, Xavi. I'm going to turn back to you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and I really and thank you to all of our panelists for the extraordinary information you've shared with us. Back to you, Xavi.
Thank you, Sandy. Julianne, would you like to share a few words as well before we wrap?
Of course, thank you, Xavi. I think for me, this webinar has been really about one big topic that is essentially reflected in this great diversity of speakers, of experts that we've heard from, and that is, it is a team effort. We can't just focus on, humanitarian organizations. We can't just focus on research. We have to really work together. And I think one of the points that came across very, very clearly is that the most important partner in this work is not another organization, it's the communities themselves. So we really need to sort of get out of our bubble of being an organization and we come and we go, to enable these conversations with local communities, build on local capacities, and make sure that these anticipatory action systems that we're building up, they don't leave when we leave, but they stay, and there are really people, there are local organizations, there are local partners that will keep working on them and will make sure that these systems stay in place. I think the other part is, and that was, Andy, that was the compliment you missed, that we need to continue to have these very frank conversations on what works, what doesn't work. We've done a pretty good job sort of trying to identify the success stories. Now, I think we also need to spend a bit more time on identifying the failures and figuring out why. And so we need to have these very, very honest conversations with each other. And Shari, I think with that, I can just give back to you to tell us about an opportunity where we could have those conversations in the foreseeable future.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Julianne. And I also want to do a hat tip to Emmy's Sandy, Nina, and Louisa Chandler Edmund for their collaboration in bringing this together. I know we're all going to carry forward the insights and strategies that we've garnered from our panelists, so we'll use them in our work and continue to advocate for and implement AA in our respective fields. So the opportunity is our next webinar, which will focus on policy and program impact, and will highlight the experiences of countries such as Zambia, Pakistan, Ethiopia, Jordan, and others that have integrated anticipatory action into government structures. And we'll discuss the challenges, of course, as well as successful strategies and lessons learned. And this session will build on the themes we've explored today, and we'll dive deeper into the institutionalization of anticipatory actions within existing government frameworks. We hope all of you will join us as we continue to expand our understanding and improve our practices in this crucial area. We'll confirm the exact dates soon, so do stay in touch. And also, with the Global Dialogue Platform on Anticipatory Humanitarian Action that's happening in Berlin from October 22nd to 24th this year, anyone who is interested in co-hosting a session, please reach out to Nina. She has dropped her email address in the chat, or will have done in a few seconds. And we will confirm dates for our next webinar. Keep an eye out for the registration details, which again will be sent to your email and available on the Anticipation Hub's website. Nina's email address for collaborating or co-hosting sessions for the Berlin event is now in the chat. So do reach out for her, add the CGIAR and Anticipation Hub's email addresses to your contacts so that you don't miss anything. And thank you. That's all that's left to say is a big, big thank you for joining us today. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing as many of you and more at our next webinar. Goodbye, take care, have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye.